the statistics on loneliness are very clear. 9 million people say that they feel lonely often or always at some point in their life. And we are seeing the mental health effects of this in a broad brushstrokes way across public policy issues. But it's also something that is flagged to us in a very granular way with all the charities that we work with. Every single CSJ Alliance charity that I've worked with has mentioned how significant the issue of loneliness is when you're tackling some of the root causes of poverty. A social support structure and a social support network is crucial if you're looking at issues such as debt, education, family breakdown, addiction, homelessness. These are all key. And the question is, how do you tackle such an issue that kind of first sight seem a little amorphous? And one of the key ways to look at that is through the built environment and the way that that can provide the key resources for community flourishing and thriving. So I'm delighted that we have a fantastic panel here today. We are expecting Danny Kruger to join us shortly. And to introduce our other panelists, we have Iain Dale, broadcaster, political commentator with LBC, among many other outlets, and also Louise Perry, who is writer and campaigner, written a lot extensively for the Daily Mail and the New Statesman, has published a timely and provocative book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, a new guide to sex in the 21st century, and she is director of The Other Half, which is a non-partisan think tank. We also have Rob Boughton, who is CEO of Thakeham, a major leading developer and placemaker, and James Alcock, who is CEO of the Plunkett Foundation, whose role is as a national charity supporting rural community-owned businesses. So without further ado, we'll start off our panel. Afterwards, there will be Q&A session, so please think of your questions, be ready. And our first speaker will be Iain Dale. Thank you very much. Iain doesn't normally make that kind of noise, but
I'm not even going to bother with it. I think this is a really interesting subject. When Tracy Crouch first started looking at this when she was sports minister, a lot of people, I think, made fun of it. Well, how can you have a minister for loneliness? But if you're a radio presenter, you completely understand the importance of the subject, because particularly on days like Christmas Day, and I've only presented on Christmas Day twice in my 12 years on LBC, but each time it sounds odd to say it's a profoundly moving experience, but you know that you are talking to people and you are the only voice that they will hear on Christmas Day because they are lonely. And I always think Christmas broadcasting is almost a social service to people, because they're hearing a familiar voice, one that they hear maybe every day throughout the year. And that's really important to people on a day like that. I was trying to think, have I ever been lonely? I think the only time was when I lived in Germany, in southern Germany, and I was there in my in the middle of my university degree. And it was quite an isolating experience, because although I'd spent a year living in North Germany, where people are incredibly friendly, I found people in this village that I was living in incredibly unfriendly and not welcoming at all. And I just was almost counting the hours before I could end the year and go home. So that's really my own experience of it. But I just want to leave you with one message, which in 5 minutes is probably one is quite enough. And it is about the power of radio, particularly community radio. And I've never done anything on community radio, but I was in Liverpool last week at the Labour Party conference, and the local community radio station there, originally titled Liverpool Community Radio, they invited me to do a sort of Desert Island Discs feature. And it was just really inspiring to see their setup and how they operate and the kind of community initiatives that they're involved in. And it's the sort of thing that BBC local radio stations or commercial local radio stations probably used to do, but all of the commercial ones have been bought up by big groups like Global Bauer, News UK. And they've all sort of gone into these big national groups now, so they're not as local as they used to be. And I think it's a real opportunity for community radio to give local people a voice that they could probably never get otherwise, and to be involved in local community initiatives. And you know that if you can attract somebody to a local event, you get to know people, and that feeling of loneliness sort of disappears. And I suppose, apart from Christmas Day, I think that there have been other incidents that have made me realise the power that radio has to connect with people who are on their own or living in difficult times. I remember one day doing a phone-in on Universal Credit and the bedroom tax, and I had 3 50 to 60-year-old men phone in, and they each cried on the radio, which I do all the time, but I mean, it's quite unusual for that to happen, particularly 3 people consecutively. And you start realising that as a Conservative, you can make an argument for the bedroom tax, for the universal credit, but when you actually then hear from the front line on how it's operating, you realise that something's going terribly wrong. And it certainly was on the bedroom tax. And during COVID, I was broadcasting 140 programmes, not from the LBC studio, but from my bedroom. And it doesn't get much more intimate radio than that. And you realise again that you are possibly the only person that someone will actually hear during the day. And because we're all encouraged to let people know who we are, so if I meet someone in the street, they know that I drive an Audi, they know that I support West Ham, they know that I have a Jack Russell and a Schnauzer. I mean, silly little things, but you are the friend that they've never met before. And particularly during COVID, that was so true. And some of you may know I do a podcast with Jackie Smith called For the Many. And during COVID, we did it twice a week. And I've had so many people say to me, "You helped me get through COVID," which I first of all thought was a really weird thing for people to say. And I thought it was just one of those things you say to somebody you've never met. But it's true. I know that there are 3 people in this country who are alive today that wouldn't be had I not done a mental health hour during COVID, because they told me. And when you hear stories like that, it is profoundly moving, and it gives you it shows you what a responsibility you have as a broadcaster to try and not just entertain, which is part of the job, but try and relate to people's lives that you could never possibly have lived yourself. And I've never suffered from any mental health problems, at least I don't think I have, but I am fascinated doing phone-ins on those issues because people tell me things that they've never told their best friend or a close family member. You think, well, they're on national radio, why would they do that? And it's because they think of me as their friend. And you can't get a bigger tribute than that, in my view. So I would love to see the Department for Culture Media, whatever it's called, Culture Media Store, or as one of my Tory MP friends said, Culture Media and Choir Boys. And I would love them to really put some serious money into community radio, because I think that is something that could really help local communities and also individuals who may be feeling very lonely, and it can help them get involved in their local communities.
Thank you very much.
Is that fine?
Being a broadcaster in the Dab Hand and sticking to timings for.
I'm not. I usually go to news breaks minutes late. So.
Louise Perry.
Hello. I'm going to use the microphone because I have a tiny voice. I'm going to hear me. No. Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna talk about television as well, which is a nice follow-on from Iain's discussion of radio. I hope I'm not the only person in the room who's a fan of Dairy Girls. And I was thinking about Dairy Girls on the weekend because there's a character. So for anyone who's not seen it, it's a comedy sitcom about teenagers growing up with troubles in Northern Ireland in the 1990s, and it centres on a particular family, and one of the members of the family is an old bloke called Uncle Colm, who's really boring. That's basically his defining character trait. He's sweet-natured, but he's just a terrible chat, and anyone who encounters he bores him to death. But he is always invited to family events, and he's therefore a minor character within the drama, but an ever-present one, because he's always invited along. And the teenage girls at the centre of it don't really understand why, and they don't enjoy Uncle Colm's presence. But he is the culture, I suppose, of working class Northern Irish families at that point is such that Uncle Colm has to be invited, even though he's such a bore, and there's never any suggestion that he won't be. And I thought about him at the weekend because I did a literary festival on Saturday, and afterwards I was approached by a group of first year university students who had mixed feelings about my book, to put it kindly. And one of the things that they were resistant to is I had a chapter, so my book's called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and it is a feminist case against the sexual revolution. I argue that actually women have not done as well from the sexual revolution as popular narrative would have it. And I have a chapter at the end about marriage, where I argue that actually one of the ways in which women and children in particular, and men too, have been harmed by the events of the last half century has been a disintegration of marriage and of the family. And these young students were having none of it because they were saying, look, our families are annoying, they're boring, they're tedious, we have to go along to these things, they restrain us, all this. And surely what you need is friends, and you need to be constructing your own families from your friendship groups. And I didn't quite have the heart to tell them, like, look, in 10, 20 years' time, there's a pretty good chance we're not going to be friends anymore. Because actually most people don't, sometimes you do form lifelong friendships, but they tend to be the exception, not the rule. And those passionate friendships you have with a young person, there are all sorts of ways in which they can fall by the wayside at various points in their life. Friendship is extraordinarily important, and one of the things that has contributed to the loneliness crisis, people, as a lack of friendship at every point along the life spectrum, isn't just about lonely elderly people, although it is that. It's also about young people who report tragic levels of friendlessness. And an attempt to replace real life friendships with social media and all these kind of things, which actually do more harm than good, I would say. But it is also about the family, because actually what I try to say to these young people, and it's a hard message to sell in a culture that really doesn't value family at all, is that actually you will find at moments in your life, if you are the Uncle Colm figure, if you are not the young, vivacious, fun, charming, whatever, if you don't, in order to win friendships, you need to sing for your supper. That is not true for families. The point of family is that you have obligations to each other, regardless of anything extraneous. And I think that no one is pro-loneliness, right? There's no one on the political spectrum who thinks that any of this is a good thing. It is something that people are concerned about on both the right and left. And there's this marvellous book written in 2020, which is really worth reading on the subject, called The Lonely Central by Marina Hertz. And I revisited it on the train over here, because I reviewed it at the time. And Hertz is coming very much from the left, and her policy prescriptions are all around things like more public spaces, more mixing between socioeconomic classes in urban areas, things like that. None of which I have any complaint over, and I think those are all good policies. But she can't quite bring herself to make the pro-family case, and in fact makes some dismissive comments about the traditional family. But I think that this is one of those issues that is so important that we can't be partisan about it in that way. I think that the one statistic that I wrote down, which is relevant to what Iain was just saying from Hertz's book when I was reading it this morning, is 60% of older people say that TV is their main source of company. And this feeds into something I'm really interested in at the moment and been reading a lot about, which is household structure. More people now live alone than probably at any point in human history. And the proportion of people who are living alone now has, I think, doubled since the 1970s, and is much, much, much higher than in previous centuries. And some of that is a story of people have choice and not wanting to live in overcrowded 2-bedroom homes filled with 10 people. Some of this is a good news story about affluence. But it is also a story of economic forces that push us apart and encourage us to be mobile and to disregard things like community and religion and family, none of which have any real market value, and in which in fact often act as impediments to the market, but which also make life worth living for the vast majority of people. And some of it is also an ideological story about wanting to prioritise freedom over everything else. And it is the sort of ideology that makes a great deal of sense when you're a young person and you think that your friends are your family, and that this is going to, that you have no need for Uncle Cole and for all of the boring and restrictive elements of family. But I think that it is one of those lessons that you learn as you get older, that what we have seen happen in this country, and I fear we'll continue to see happening, is as the family and as the community and as religion and all the other things I think we're going to talk about today, as that steps away, either nobody steps in, all these lonely old people with the TV-only company, or the market steps in, or the state steps in. Those are the only options, and neither the market nor the state are actually capable of inviting, the dull but kindly or relative to dinner. There is only one institution that is going to do that, and it's the family.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to start to look at, if it's not the family, who is it that steps in to help with loneliness? And I think our view is that cohesive communities are hugely important as well. And the ability for a community to help address loneliness, for people to engage, is perhaps something that we've lost the importance of in the places that we have, the places that we create, and how places exist. And we've had a slightly different view, perhaps, to many of our contemporaries in the development industry. We completed a piece of work last year with the then Conservative Council, Oxford County Council, looking at how good community placemaking addresses social health and equality. And a lot of learnings came out of that. A lot of learnings have come out of the last few years for us in the places that we create. And delivering infrastructure, delivering facilities that stand the test of time and are there for the community is hugely important. So for us, we work very closely with the Plunkett Foundation. James will explain exactly what the Plunkett Foundation is in a minute. But for us, delivering community facilities that the community come together to be part of, to set up, to run, and to interact with each other. Making sure that good places are around central features, be that a village green, be that schools, be that shops, cafes, other facilities, etc. And giving the opportunity for people to interact. We're on a journey towards net zero and zero carbon placemaking as well. And actually taking out car-based transport or carbon-based transport, certainly, and making people, or inspiring people, or enabling people, or encouraging people to walk and to cycle and to local facilities rather than further afield is hugely important. What we've learned through that actually is that in a lot of places we've had the answers previously and lost those answers. And one of the things that we get accused of a lot of the time is you're building a village community shop, how's the little old lady who's going to walk there going to carry her shopping bag? Well, she doesn't. Because actually you employ the 14-year-old kid when they finish school to deliver the shopping from the shop to her house, which causes them to ring the doorbell and have a conversation and interact. So the only person that little old lady hears that day isn't just the radio or the TV, but actually they interact with somebody else in the community. When you look at the community value of that in terms of how they interact and the value they have with each other, and how it perhaps stops certain degrees of nuisance and other bits and pieces because we all know each other, it's quite powerful too. So for us, it's been around looking at how we can get people to interact, how we can utilise schools, how we can utilise community facilities, shops, cafes, pubs, how we can get people to work and come together in all of that. And we find ourselves now where we've got, on some of our developments, we've got perhaps a new local hospice, and we find the trustees of the hospice, so governors at the school, we find the governors at the school are running and involved in the charity foundation for the shop, etc., etc. And all of these things interact, and the people interact, and the community interacts, and we see them setting up the village fates, the bonfire nights, the other bits and pieces. And I think it's quite interesting that as we balance the need of housing across the country and communities either large or new communities come about, it's so imperatively important that we do that the right way and we deliver proper communities in there that interact together and address what otherwise can be quite horrific consequences of creating more and more loneliness and not doing it the right way.
Thank you very much, Roy.
That leads us very nicely into James and the work of the Plunkett Foundation. Thank you very much, Sam. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. So thank you very much to CSJ and Thakeham for inviting me to talk a little bit about Plunkett's work. Plunkett Foundation is a national charity. We work throughout the UK supporting primarily rural communities to set up and run businesses in community ownership. We are mostly known for supporting community-owned village shops and pubs, but we also support a wider range of businesses from woodlands and farms, cafes, bakeries, any kind of business you can imagine we've probably supported. The motivation that we see is from a community is very much trying to save a business from closure. But once that community comes together and starts exploring what that community business can become, it ends up being so much more than what it used to be. So a village shop, for example, will have a post office, it might have a cafe, it could have a recycling centre, it could have a local food bank. A pub might be using the additional space to have affordable housing, allotments, a meeting space for clubs and societies. So it comes very much the heart of a local community. And those businesses evolve over time as well, and they evolve in response to what the community really needs. And that's why they do so well. So out of all of the business we've ever supported, long-term survival rate of 96%, which is incredible and compares very favourably with the average UK small to medium-sized business, which has just a 5-year survival rate of 46%. So incredible. The impact of these businesses, clearly creating jobs, volunteering opportunities, training, and particularly so for people that are typically excluded from the labour market. It's also boosting the local economy through local supply chains, and it's clearly retaining much needed local services where they don't exist. I probably don't need to say very much about loneliness because it's obvious that they are addressing loneliness. After all, these are probably the only businesses left in rural communities, the only place which are open during the day to go and visit. And they are extremely inclusive and accessible. Anyone can go into a village shop. Anyone can go into a pub that's got a cafe there as well. So whether you're a customer, whether you're a member, whether you're a volunteer, whether you're a shareholder, it's a really, really inclusive way of running a business. Just a few quick examples. They're multi-generational, so you can go in and you can see an over 80 serving you on the till, and you can see, as Rob said, a 14-year-old packing the bags and sending the shopping home. We often hear stories where carers and their clients go in, so it's a safe place for them to go in. It might be somebody using a wheelchair, it could be somebody with physical disabilities. But the staff, the volunteers will know that, they will welcome the individual and they will be used to that and support them. We hear very much about cases of dementia, so we hear about the individual going in and buying batteries several times a day, and at the end of the week the carer will go back and get a refund for these batteries because they know that individual is experiencing a difficulty. In my own village, we see the person that joins the fish queue. Very often these businesses will have other things coming into it. So the fish van comes on Tuesday night in my village, and it brings the whole community together. And there is a lady that comes along to that. Clearly she doesn't eat fish, but she queues every single week, and she gets to the front of the queue and she says, I don't think I need anything tonight. But she says the same thing every week because it's a way of interacting and engaging. There is also a much more sad example that I would give. A case in Norfolk where a local girl suffers from depression and anxiety, and her role in the pub was as a pot wash, and it was a way to get her out of the house. It was interacting with different individuals of different ages and backgrounds. During the pandemic, first wave of lockdown, the pub continued to be open, so she kept going. The second lockdown, unfortunately, the pub closed. And it took away everything that she was used to, all of her points of contact. And unfortunately, she took her own life because she saw no other option. Her family
have allowed us to talk about this example, but it really does demonstrate that rural communities are very diverse. There are big issues that take place in these communities. It's not just about selling nice things for bread and milk. It is much more important to that. So my key message is really the more community businesses that exist, the more people that are supported, the less people that will be feeling lonely. We've supported 850 community businesses to set up UK-wide. We see 500 new inquiries every year, and of those, about 30 will reach trading stage every year. So clearly there's a demand, there's an appetite for this, and there's more support that's needed. That's why we've really enjoyed working with Thakeham, because it's been a breath of fresh air, rather than sort of going into a community and fixing what doesn't exist and what's not there. It's been a great opportunity to build community spirit, community anchors, community hubs into a development from scratch. We don't see many developers like that, and Thakeham are doing that completely off their own bat. And it should really be congratulated. We really enjoyed working with them, and hope to see more developments integrating community ownership in the future. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for sharing out your work, and very poignantly done for the media that stores how important this is. We'd also like to extend our thanks as well to Thakeham for making this possible. We're very grateful. And finally, Danny Kruger, MP, is MP for Devizes. He is the director of the co-director of the new social covenant unit. He is the author of the policy paper commissioned by previous Prime Minister, Levelling Up Our Communities, and was for much of the last year the PPS, Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Department for Levelling Up Housing in Communities. So, and is a leading light and figure in this space. So, Danny Kruger.
Thanks, Sam. That's very good and nice. Thanks, I'm so sorry to be delayed. The usual excuses. So, I'm very sorry to have missed it. Some of the talks there, because I had an absolutely fascinating discussion. There's lots of policy which we'll go into. I just wanted to start with a sort of cultural reflection, because I think ultimately what we're talking about is the consequence. Everything is downstream of culture, and just to sort of remind ourselves, which we shouldn't be reminding, that loneliness is an abnormality. It's not the way we're designed, and we've brought this upon ourselves. And this always, I realised this. I used to do a lot of work with prisoners and ex-offenders, and repeatedly would have the experience of an event happening, and we were expecting a bunch of our members, as we call them, ex-offenders, to turn up. Someone would be chronically late, and we would sort of ask for an explanation, and he'd say in front of everyone, I had to help. It would be something like, I'm sorry I was late, I was helping my mum with the shopping, or I had to help my granny, move something. And everyone else would go, yeah, fine. And no one would be cross, except us. And of course, what was going on there was a genuinely healthy and appropriate and decent prioritisation. They were putting their family first, and they were putting them ahead of an employment opportunity or whatever project that we were offering them. And you realise that for sort of professional people who, when their mum asks them to help their shopping, but they've got a business appointment, they say, no, mum, I'll help you later, are doing something artificial that the culture has trained them to do, rightly, in my view, because ultimately your family will be better served by you honouring your professional commitments and keeping a job. And I'll help you later, mum, is the right thing to say in that situation, if possible. But that instinct that the guys we were working with had was difficult to gainsay and to say you've got your priorities wrong. It was to take some explanation. And I think that we've internalised, without thinking about it, this artificial decision to put ourselves and our, as it were, commercial obligations ahead of our families. And I think what we're experiencing, and I think Louise was talking about this when I came in, we have a sort of cult of individual self-actualization, the notion that the purpose of life is to discover the real me, That's our religious position now. And therefore, the purpose of politics and of policy is to facilitate that self-actualization, to facilitate individual choices, and not to try and create a society which is better for all, other than a society in which choice is facilitated. Whereas we used to think, in the culture that we had historically, and I think is still buried in our culture, but needs to be surfaced again, we used to think that we are social animals, that we exist in the context of our relationships, and that the purpose of life is the exercise of the human virtues, which are essentially other-facing. They're about the sort of qualities of life that benefit society. And therefore the purpose of politics is to cultivate the conditions in which people can be virtuous. And that's what our politics should be about, cultivating the conditions of virtue. And the conditions of virtue are straightforward. They're families, communities, and nations. They're the associations that give us our identity and our safety and ultimately our freedom as well. So you can't be free without these things. So we have a cultural reset, I think, that is well upstream of the policy that we need. But let's get on to the policy. And I've been hearing some very interesting suggestions there, completely endorse. Just to run through a couple of headlines. I mean, I think the primacy of the local is crucial, and I think our politics is recognising that. And without delving into sort of family trauma, Brexit was a reflection of the desire for pace and settlement. I think as much as one of national sovereignty, they're very closely connected. And I think we need to honour the spirit of Brexit in our time by enabling people to take back control from Whitehall. And so my council leader, Councillor Kluwer here from Wiltshire, and Wiltshire Council does absolutely reflect this principle, that they obviously want more power for the council, but they also really know that their job is to hand on power and responsibility to communities, and encourage that. And we saw it very strongly through COVID and with the Ukraine refugee crisis as well, the role of communities themselves. If you heard about the design of places, absolutely endorse the importance of that. We need a new business model again. Good to Plunkett absolutely lead the way on this, a model of capitalism that is that reflects the whole stakeholder economy, not just distant shareholders. And there are so many exciting models of this that we all see around us locally, and really endorse the work that Plunkett are doing with community businesses. And we've discussed the role of churches as well. I think there's a very exciting opportunity there to return to the genuine, the medieval concept of the church as not just being a place which is full on Sundays, but it's actually a trading station, a place of gathering of the local economy and of people to gather. Fiscal policy, don't know how much we discussed that, but and I know the CSJ is very strong on this, but the role of household taxation rather than an individualised personal taxation model, that was the original intention of when Nigel also brought in personal taxation to allow tax system to actually recognise family obligations as well, caring responsibilities. We need to do that. And the PM has actually made that commitment during the leadership campaign. And then lastly, a model of social care and childcare which reflects the family as the natural unit of care. At the moment we subsidise people we give more money to families whose elderly parents are in a distant residential care home rather than being cared for in their own home or their adult children's home. And we also push people into putting their children into all-day nurseries staffed by professionals, which are very good, but not giving them the flexibility to use that money as they would perhaps want to, just to care for their kids in their own homes or the childminders, or have a more flexible system. So we are making the family expensive and irrelevant through social policy, which is regrettable. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Danny. So in the spirit of being social animals, we will throw this open to Q&A. Who would like to start? Yes, at the back. Yourself.
Me?
Yes.
One thing that you mentioned, and sorry,
Can you say who you are as well? Sorry.
David Humphries. I'm a county councillor for Warwickshire. Iain hit a chord there. I went in the local shop, and the local shopkeeper said to me, we've got a guy here, he buys 7 juice supply pies every week, 6 cans of beans, and a loaf of bread. And that's what he lived on. 1 juice supply, half a tin of beans, 2 slices of bread, everything. Lost his wife, never cooked in his life, old ex-miner, really hard engineering type guy but he was so lonely. And when we met him, my wife frightened him to death because she produced 3 slices of chicken, 4 lots of vegetables, and he hadn't eaten vegetables since his wife had died. That loneliness was there long before, this is during COVID, that loneliness was long before COVID. And unfortunately, in this spring, he just passed away. And another old boy, I feel quite ashamed, maybe quite ashamed of him, because that old boy, that house has been occupied by another old boy of a similar age, 89, 90 years old. And I've never knocked on the door since poor old Stanley passed away. That loneliness existed long before COVID. You are the friends of people when they listen every day. And my father used to listen to the radio in exactly the same way. And I just don't know how we're going to make it, what we're going to make it, how we're going to actually make it so that we pick up the next generation. Because you know, loneliness doesn't stop because Stan died, somebody else has come along. And it's going to take a lot of everybody to stick their oar in and make sure that's covered. I hope I'm covered the point there. Thank you.
Do you have a question as well?
Well, the question is, it's people, it's locals that were doing it. It was the shopkeeper that made me do it. It was my wife that made me feed Stan properly. But they're out there all the time. It's not. You need to support the local community because yesterday or the day before, we had 40 people in a coffee morning that are all lonely old ladies. I'm old myself now, but I mean those people would put together to get together and then to take 40 people, do a Sunday lunch, then do a coffee afternoon. It isn't free. We need to supply cash. How can, and the MP sat there, how can we actually make sure that that money gets into the communities? I'm a councillor, I get funding, I can put a few £100, maybe £1,000 into help. But what we need to do is encourage people to do it. My question is, what can the government do and local councils do to make sure that it continues? Because it goes on generation after generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Daniel, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, very, very powerful. And ultimately, the fact that you're referring to an individual there reflects the problem that you're describing, which is how can a remote government possibly have a policy that helps Stan when he'll have particular individual needs. And I was very struck during COVID when Richard, my colleague will feel this too. There was a recognition that a lot of these shielding families were going to be struggling to feed themselves. So the government thought in its wisdom what we need is a national food parcel programme, which they organised by contracting with Break Brothers. Sorry, I hope they're not sponsoring. One of the worst food. Well, anyway, one of these huge sort of PLC companies and others to get these food parcels to these families, rather than doing what they obviously should have done and eventually did do, which was trust local government and civil society to source food locally for the shielding families. So the model you're describing, the problem you're describing, cannot be addressed by some national programme. And what we need to do, and you asked how to get the money to where it's needed, because of course there's a great risk of waste. We do need to have more trust of the system, of local systems, and we need to empower other funders, I think, to act as intermediaries. So I'm a great believer in the community foundation. If you can't just devolve power directly to money to local government, which I don't need to do in all cases, Richard, we need to trust the intermediaries that exist in civil society, like community foundations, and grant makers like Plunkett and others who can develop the relationships. And it might be a bit patchy and messy, and different things will be done in different ways, and everyone will complain about a postcode lottery. But actually, that is probably the most efficient way to deliver the value we need.
Thank you very much, Danny. I'm going to collect just a few questions and then The panelists can speak to those. There's a gentleman at the back who's going to ask a question just next to the last question.
Hi there, Mark Brooks. I work for an organisation, Dimensions, who support people with learning disabilities across the country. One of the things we found out through asking people useful questions is, what with COVID and that, lots of community things have gone just because of lack of funding, and also in some of our people we support are in communal areas, so they have to go into the city. And like I say, going into the city as well costs as well, and then even some of the local things have gone just because they haven't come back out or scared to still come back as well. And a lot of people as well have said they're scared to come out of the house because of COVID and that. So my question is, we keep asking that question around is what does loneliness mean to people? Because as well that can mean anything, including myself. So I suppose the thing is, what can the government do to again make sure that maybe more things can come back into the community?
Thank you very much. Just a couple more questions. Yes,
Thanks, Bob Hughes. Bob Hughes, Surrey County Councillor, and I run a charity delivering vision impaired and deaf services. And I'm rather agreeing with the last speaker. I haven't watched Derry Girls, but the uncle you described, people who are deaf or vision impaired, and dare I say learning difficulties, all sorts of other things, will be treated just like the boring uncle. And the initiatives described, I think, are great. And by the way, I think Thakeham and Berkeley create communities. I wish some of the other builders created communities, which they just don't. And in fact, what they're developing is tomorrow's slums, in my view. And the question is, how do we get to those people? Because none of the initiatives here will get to those individuals who are awkward and will be avoided. And so there's a range of people like that. That's why I think blind people listen to the RNIB radio, because it's their community. Beginning of the pandemic, deaf people had no idea what was going on. Although there are 550 or so profoundly deaf people in Surrey, our first BSL broadcast on Facebook got over 40,000 hits, reaching a huge number of people. People are forgotten in that way, and how do we get to those difficult individuals?
Thank you very much. We'll just take one more question, just briefly. Yes, in the corner over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Sherry Rackham, and I'm a councillor in Epping Forest. My question is, obviously, due to COVID, people are working at home. People have got very comfortable working at home. They're quite happy to work from home. How do we change the culture now to get people back into offices? And obviously, they'll have the interaction of working with people again and not feeling lonely.
Thank you very much.
Something that I'm very interested in at the moment as a policy area, something we're interested in at the other half, which is we're a non-partisan feminist think tank interested in common sense policies for women and families. Founded this summer, so this is extremely early days, but one of the areas that we're very interested in is obviously care, fundamental feminist issue, and how that relates to housing. And the issue to me seems to be so much one of just geographical proximity. It is just so much more difficult to support family members if you don't live close to them. And obviously, the closest you can live to them is in your own home, which until really very recently was the norm. That's how human beings live. They live in extended family units within the same small footprint. And increasingly that is not the norm. And I think that's a problem. There are other countries which have all sorts of incentives in place to try and get extended family to live closer together. We don't really think of the extended family. I mean, an example that I often come back to in my mind is a friend who is now a doctor. She had a baby as a single mother in her last year at medical school, and when she was applying for her F1 placements, she said it was extremely important that she be close to her mother, because obviously if you do night shifts as a doctor, you have to have, nurseries aren't open, you have to have somebody who will look after your toddler, she was then, during night shifts. And just couldn't wrap their heads around it. There was no box you tick which says I have to be. They can understand being close to a spouse, they can understand being close to a child in school, particularly if that child has a primary school placement and so on that needs to be protected. But the idea of being close to the extended family, that it wasn't on the drop down menu, and she had serious computer says no again and again, really fought, did end up being placed fortunately close to her mother, and they actually ended up living together. The fastest growing type of household in this country at the moment is the multi-generational household. It's still a minority of households, but these are households with 3 generations living together. So it might be parents, children, and elderly parents, or it might be adult children. You know, there are all sorts of configurations, annexes, granny flats, loft conversions, whatever. People come up with their own solutions. These are people who are coming up with this very elegant, very historically normal solution to the problem both of care at both ends of the life cycle and also of the housing crisis. If you can't afford to buy a property on your own, there is an economy of scale when you buy good family members. The problem that they're facing now is that these people are acting against the grain, actually, of policy as it is currently arranged. They struggle to get specialist mortgage products. It can be quite difficult to persuade high street lenders to lend to, say, 4 adults on the same what's it called when we go on the same deed, that's the one. There aren't appropriate properties available. I mean, so some developers are now making specific multi-generational new builds, which have a combination of communal and private areas, which is ideal for granting everyone independence, but they're quite unusual. Retrofitting properties can be difficult with planning restraints and so on. So I think it's a really good news story that you have all of these families who are deciding nevertheless to construct actually what is the most stable household structure available for the protection of everyone at every point of the life cycle. And I think the government should be helpful.
Thank you, Louise. Rob?
Yeah, so I think there's an opportunity for us to certainly ensure that cohesive communities cater for all parts of the community. And I think personally our belief is that we build a fully cross-section of property, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, bungalows, houses of all shapes and sizes, and mix them in together. Because I don't think it's right, personally, that we put all the elderly people over there, all the first-time buyers over here, all the affordable properties over there. It's absolutely about a cohesive, well-joined-up society. I think that's really important. The second thing, from our point of view, is we're just starting to work actually with your neighbours at West Sussex around how we can integrate true social care properties into our developments too. So if we've got a large development, making sure that we're building a social care facility that caters not just for elderly social care, but all social care needs, all people where they require more extra care than perhaps is what we would define the norm, if you will, on those developments.
But
and make sure that
that'll be 24 in the abortion.
Right, exactly. So there we're taking that the next step with West Sussex at the moment, and developing the next round of those that offer to even wider cross section of society. And actually, our experience is putting those front and centre on what we do is hugely important as well. So we have a development where we provided a home for the local hospice, a new facility for them. And rather than hide it away, we put it right on the village green, because it's important, it's part of that cohesive community as such. So I think it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that we work together to cater for all of society if we want a cohesive society.
Thank you very much, Rob. Iain, could I say to you?
Right, let's have a bit of spice into this debate. I totally disagree with you.
Yeah.
When you say, I think the government should be helping them. Why do we always think it's the government's responsibility to do these things? I thought we were conservatives and we believe in localism, devolve it down to the sort of the most local point, and that surely is a parish council. I mean, parish councils actually need something to do rather than just be full of busybodies. And I mean, when I hear the chap at the back, David, talk, it said he was a county councillor. I'm thinking, well, isn't this something that county councils and district councils ought to be involved in? Central government is not the solution to loneliness. Yes, they can provide some sort of guidance and whatever, but I mean, every time now anything goes wrong, oh, the government, it's the government's fault. The government should do something. Well, I'd love to know what the government should do to help the kind of people that many of you have been talking about here. It's actually down to each individual in this room, actually. If you devolve it down to individuals and communities, rather than some anonymous public body, surely that's what it is. If you know that your neighbour, if you haven't seen your neighbour for a week, isn't it your civic responsibility to knock on the door? End of ranting.
I will give Louise a very brief right to reply on that point.
So the only thing I'd say is that I agree with you, it has to happen at local level. What I object to is when the government put impediments in the way of people who actually want to have more cohesive families and communities. And that's where I think central government has to step in order to step out the way.
And James, so Ian couldn't have set me up any better because I was going to disagree with you, actually. I think it's a case of both, because listening to the examples that David was talking about, I was thinking, well, community businesses do that. They support local food, they put recipe cards out to help people know how to make use of proper food. You've got the pubs that are doing school dinners and they're doing luncheon clubs and suppers for particular vulnerable groups. And they're doing that off their own bat or back, I never know which it is. But they're doing it off their own bat because, just as you say, because they're decent people and they know those people in that community. But what I disagree with is there is a role for government. So community businesses could be encouraged. They already are by government as a community ownership fund, but more needs to be done to get the right support in to ensure the right community groups get the support. There also needs to be greater policy. So we do have community rights. But those rights could be stronger, they could be more consistent throughout the UK, they could include a community right to buy, to give communities that better chance of taking ownership. And as we said about Thakeham, there could be encouragement to other developers to be including community and community businesses into developments, and not just traffic calming, which we get in our own village.
Thank you very much, James. There are many questions, so I will take just a couple more. I'm sure Danny will have plenty to comment on that as well, but the lady in the red jacket over there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. I have to respond. I'm Sue Baxter. I'm Vice Chairman of NOW, the National Association of Local Councils, which is our parish and town council sector.
Oops.
No, I totally agree with you. I think, this isn't something that should be topped down by government. We need support, we need help to build our capacity and our capability, but we have the means to deliver. We're not beholden on sort of government funding. We precept ourselves. I think, nationally we did a great job during COVID, actually pulling our communities together to help those who are vulnerable. And I think we ought to be building on that model. I think, locally we call it a memory cafe. We have about 100 plus local people who are either suffering from or living, should I say, with dementia, or who are just lonely. One of our councillors yesterday ran the marathon to support it. So, we have the will, but what we do need sometimes is a little bit of help to build our capacity. And that would be my ask from government. Don't do the job, help us to get the tools to do it.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just behind you. Oh. Sorry.
I'm Vinay from the University of Oxford Government School, and I'm just thinking about one of my professors is doing some research on how football brings people together, but this is on the replacement of religion. So if you look around the churches, and even there's this country built on Christian values, but the churches seem to be emptying. So although some of the things we talked about, I don't think just points of contact represent a reduction in loneliness, it's about developing community. So what other aspects of policy do we think? And even football is not as powerful as a religious organisation bringing people together. So I don't know if there's any thought of how to, we heard about how we can use churches in other ways as like means of transaction, but how do you develop kind of the power of community without having religion? How does that work?
Who's your professor?
Paul Collier.
Paul Collier, famous economist, development economist. Danny, can I come to you on that question?
Well, I mean, I think Collier's work has been really influential on the government, and well, certainly on Michael Gove and the whole, and particularly his insight that there isn't any single solution to the challenge of levelling up and placemaking, radical uncertainty, I think you call it, and there is, I mean, to the argument about to what extent this is central government's responsibility. Well, in every space, if you're a conservative at least, you've recognised that nothing is done purely from above, and the job of government, if any, is to set the framework. And I talk about cultivating the conditions of virtue rather pretentiously, but what I mean is I do think government has a significant role in creating the context in which we make our own personal decisions to be good or bad, and which ultimately is what is going to drive outcomes like loneliness. But yes, I mean the role of sport and football and these sort of civic institutions, which have a far greater sense of as a power to unite and connect, is enormous. And again, to praise the government where praise is due, you know, there was a real recognition when was it Bury FC went under and Wigan that actually government could play a role there in helping, but ultimately the answer was going to be in the community finding the money to buy the club and restore it to community ownership, which is what has happened there. So I think it really does matter to recognise the role of community. If we say that it's none of government's responsibility to do any of these things, we imply that government could be neutral, Iain, and it can't, as you know. I mean, the government is active in society in every respect until we get to the anarchy that, you know, as a good Tory we might want, when government has no role at all. But insofar as government has legislative and fiscal levers, then they're going to be active, they're going to have an influence, and neutrality isn't an option. So what kind of society do we want, and how can government nudge us that way?
And nudge is the key word.
Okay, nudge is better, yeah.
Well, we are coming up to time. I'm so sorry. I know there's a real sense that this issue is very much of its moment, and we could go on more and more. I'm sure many of these panelists might be able to hang around. I know everyone has very busy schedules, but I just want to say thank you very much to Thakeham for making this possible. The CSJ has plenty of events going on today. Please do stay tuned, stay in touch with us, join in, and let's conclude by thanking our panelists for a wonderful panel.